F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote something about love that stuck with me over the years. There are all kinds of love in this world, but never the same love twice. When I first read those words decades ago, they were just pretty sentences on a page. Now, at 74 years old, sitting in my study with the afternoon sun streaming through the window, I understand exactly what he meant. My name is Thomas. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, in a two-story house that once echoed with the chaos of family life. There used to be bicycles in the driveway, toys scattered across the living room floor, and the constant hum of conversation and laughter. My wife, Margaret, would be at the kitchen counter preparing meals, our children arguing over the remote control, the dog barking at passing cars. These days, it's just me, my morning tea, and the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I was married for 38 years. Margaret was her name, though everyone called her Maggie. She died 9 years ago from complications related to diabetes. The decline was gradual, then sudden. One day, she was managing her condition, going about her daily routine, and 6 months later, she was gone. In those dark weeks after her funeral, well-meaning friends and relatives offered their consolation along with their predictions. They told me I'd heal in time. They said I was young enough to start over, healthy enough to find happiness again, that I deserved to have someone by my side. For a brief period, I wondered if they might be right. They weren't. Most afternoons I sit in this same leather chair, Earl Grey tea in hand, prepared exactly the way I've always preferred it. On the bookshelf directly in front of me sits a photograph from our wedding day. Margaret is radiant in ivory, and I'm drowning in a borrowed tuxedo that was comically oversized. We're both beaming with that particular kind of joy that comes from not yet knowing what life has in store. I look at that photograph daily, not out of melancholy or an inability to move forward, but because it serves as a reminder of what genuine love felt like. The kind of love that changes you, the kind that doesn't happen twice. Margaret and I met when I was 27. She was 24, the younger sister of a colleague. We were introduced at a summer cookout, spent the entire evening in conversation, and by the time people were saying their goodbyes, I knew my life had just changed direction. We were married 14 months later and had 2 children, David and Rebecca. Our marriage wasn't a fairy tale. We had arguments about money, stress about careers, periods where we struggled to make ends meet. I remember years when I took on weekend shifts at the warehouse just to cover the mortgage. There were nights we fell asleep angry, mornings when silence filled the house. But beneath all of that, there was a deep, unshakable love. We understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation. We saw each other's flaws and strengths with equal clarity, and we chose each other anyway, day after day. That's what real love is, I believe. The decision to stay when it would be easier to leave. The commitment to choose your person even when they're difficult. After Margaret passed, I felt untethered. The house became oppressively silent. Our bed felt vast and empty. I'd wake in the darkness, reaching across the mattress for her warmth, finding only cold sheets. My children worried constantly. David called every other day. Rebecca visited every weekend, and they'd bring my grandchildren over to fill the house with noise and distraction. I was grateful for their concern, truly, but I also needed space to grieve, to figure out who Thomas was without Margaret beside him. It took nearly 3 years before I felt functional again, before I recognized the person looking back at me in the mirror. I started attending a community group for retirees, joined a book club, began volunteering at the local library on Tuesday mornings. Small activities, manageable commitments, just enough to give structure to my days. That's where I met Dorothy. Dorothy was 68, widowed for 7 years after her husband succumbed to a sudden stroke. She was intelligent, quick-witted, genuinely warm. We started chatting after one of the volunteer shifts, and gradually our conversations extended beyond the library. Coffee once a week became lunch twice a week, which turned into occasional dinners. My children noticed the change in my routine. They didn't ask direct questions initially, but I could sense them observing, wondering what might develop. Dorothy and I enjoyed each other's company immensely. We'd take long walks through the park, share stories about our respective families, our past lives. She had a way of making me laugh that I hadn't experienced in years. I seemed to have the same effect on her. For several months, I thought perhaps this was the beginning of something significant, that maybe this was what the next chapter looked like. One evening, about 8 months into our friendship, Dorothy invited me to her home for dinner. She prepared roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, and green beans, everything arranged beautifully on her dining table with candles and soft jazz playing from a vintage record player. Midway through the meal, she set down her fork, looked directly at me, and said, "Thomas, I think we should discuss what we're doing here, what we both want from this." I understood immediately what she was asking. She wanted clarity about my intentions, whether I envisioned a serious future together, whether marriage was a possibility. As I sat across from her, watching the candlelight flicker across her hopeful expression, I had a moment of painful clarity. I genuinely liked Dorothy. I valued her friendship. I cared about her well-being. But I didn't love her, not in the way I had loved Margaret, not even close. It wasn't Dorothy's fault in any way. She was exceptional and deserved someone who could love her without conditions, without reservations, without constant mental comparisons. But I couldn't be that person. Every time she laughed, I found myself comparing it to Margaret's laugh. When she reached for my hand, I noticed how different it felt from Margaret's touch. The weight of her presence, the rhythm of her speech, the small details of who she was as a person, all of it existed in the shadow of what I'd lost. It wasn't fair to either of us. I told her that evening, as gently and honestly as I could manage. I said, "Dorothy, you're a remarkable woman, and you deserve someone who can give you everything. I can't do that. I'm not ready for what you're looking for, and truthfully, I don't think I ever will be." We both cried. We both knew it was the right decision, even as it hurt. That was 5 years ago. Since then, I haven't pursued romantic relationships. I haven't tried dating apps or accepted offers from friends who want to set me up with other widows they know. People ask me occasionally, friends from the book club, my own children, "Dad, doesn't the loneliness get to you?" And yes, sometimes it does. There are moments when the silence feels heavy, when I wish I had someone to share dinner with, to discuss the news with, to simply sit beside. But loneliness, I've discovered, isn't the worst possible outcome. What's far worse is sharing your life with someone while feeling fundamentally alone, waking up beside someone and wishing they were someone else. I'd rather live independently than settle for that kind of hollow companionship. At 74, I have clarity about what I want and what I absolutely don't want. I don't want another marriage. I don't want the legal entanglements, the social expectations, the inevitable complications. I don't want to blend households, combine finances, or navigate the complex dynamics of merging families. I don't want to deal with adult children who are understandably protective of their inheritance, or explain to confused grandchildren why Grandpa has brought a new woman to Christmas dinner. I've already experienced building a life with someone. Margaret and I raised our children together, created a home together, built something meaningful. That chapter is complete. I have no interest in attempting to replicate it. Here's what people who've never been in this position fail to understand. When you're young, life is about construction. You get married, purchase property, have children, make plans for decades ahead. But at 74, you're no longer building. You're protecting what you've already created, protecting the hard-won peace, the independence you've fought to maintain. I wake when my body tells me to wake. I eat what I want when I want it. I watch whatever interests me on television without negotiating with anyone else. I answer to no one. That might seem selfish to some people. Perhaps it is, but I spent 4 decades prioritizing other people's needs, my wife's, my children's, my employer's. For the first time in my adult life, I have the freedom to prioritize myself. I'm not willing to surrender that. A few months back, my daughter Rebecca came over for afternoon tea. We were sitting on the back patio and she asked me directly, "Dad, are you truly okay living this way, alone?" I looked at her and said, "Rebecca, I'm not alone. I have you and David, I have my grandchildren, I have friends and a community, I have a life." She pressed further. "But don't you want a partner, someone special?" I smiled and told her the truth. I had someone special for 38 years. She was more than I ever hoped for. Rebecca went quiet for a moment, then said softly, I miss Mom too. I reached over and squeezed her hand. I know you do, sweetheart. We sat together in comfortable silence watching the birds at the feeder, and I realized that these moments, this connection with my daughter, this is what I actually need. Not another wife, not a new romantic partner. I need peace. I need time with my family. I need quiet routines and simple pleasures, and I have those things now. Society presents companionship as something exclusively available through marriage or romantic partnership, but that's fundamentally untrue. I have abundant companionship. I play chess with a group of men every Thursday evening. I have breakfast with my neighbor Gerald every Sunday morning. I video chat with my grandchildren regularly. I'm not isolated or withdrawn from society. I'm simply intentional about how I spend my limited time and energy and with whom I choose to spend it. I don't need a marriage license to have meaningful connections. There's another factor that people rarely discuss openly. When you marry someone at this age, you're not just marrying the individual. You're inheriting their entire complicated life, their children, their unresolved issues, their health problems, their financial situation. My children have made it diplomatically clear, without stating it explicitly, that they're protective of what Margaret and I built together. This house, our savings, the family heirlooms we intended to pass down, these things matter to them. I understand their concern. I share it. If I were to remarry at this stage, everything would become legally and emotionally complicated. Estate planning, inheritance rights, legal claims, it would create tension and conflict where none currently exists. Here's what I've learned through experience and reflection. Love and marriage are not synonymous. You can genuinely love someone without marrying them. You can care deeply about a person, enjoy their company, spend meaningful time together, all without signing legal documents. Marriage made perfect sense when I was 27, when Margaret and I were building a shared future, raising children, planning for the decades ahead. But at 74, what purpose would it serve? I'm not having more children. I'm not purchasing another home. I'm not constructing a future. I'm living out whatever time remains as peacefully and simply as possible. I don't need a contract for that. Sometimes I wonder what Margaret would think if she could see me now, living alone, refusing to pursue other relationships. I believe she'd understand. She knew me better than anyone ever has. She knew I'm stubborn and set in my ways, that once I've reached a decision, I don't easily change course. But I also think she'd want me to be content, and I genuinely am, in my own particular way. I'm not miserable or wallowing in perpetual grief. I have a good life, simple, predictable, peaceful, and that's sufficient. If you're reading this and you're in your 50s, 60s, or 70s contemplating whether to remarry, I'd encourage you to ask yourself one brutally honest question. Is this about love, or is it about fear? Fear of loneliness, fear of dying alone, fear of judgment from others. Because if fear is the primary motivation, that's not a solid foundation for marriage. Being alone is not the catastrophe our culture often portrays it as. What's truly catastrophic is losing your peace of mind, surrendering your independence, living with daily regret because you made a major life decision based on what other people expected of you rather than what you genuinely wanted. I'm not suggesting that remarriage is wrong for everyone in this age group. For some men, finding love again brings genuine joy and fulfillment. For others, companionship and partnership enhance their remaining years in meaningful ways. Everyone's circumstances are different, and there's no universal answer. But I am suggesting that you examine your motivations carefully, that you're honest with yourself about what you truly want versus what you think you should want. For me, the answer is clear. I don't want to remarry. I don't want the complications, the compromises, the inevitable comparisons to what I had before. I want to honor the life Margaret and I shared by living the rest of my days with integrity and peace. I want to be present for my children and grandchildren. I want to maintain my independence and my routines. I want to wake up each morning grateful for another day, without obligations I didn't choose. The house is quiet now as I finish writing this. The sun has moved across the sky and shadows stretch across the hardwood floors. In a few hours, I'll prepare a simple dinner. Probably read for a while. Maybe call David to see how his week is going. Tomorrow I'll have breakfast with Gerald, work on the crossword puzzle, perhaps tend to the garden. These small, unremarkable activities make up my days now, and I find them deeply satisfying. There are all kinds of love in this world, but never the same love twice. I had my great love. I had 38 years with an extraordinary woman who knew me completely and loved me anyway. That was my chance, and it was more than many people ever experience. I don't need to search for a replacement or a sequel. I don't need to prove to anyone that I'm still capable of being loved or being in a relationship. I simply need to live out my remaining years with dignity, gratitude, and peace. That's the truth about remarrying after 60, at least from where I sit. It's not for everyone, and it's certainly not for me. And I'm completely at peace with that decision. Thank you for taking the time to read my perspective. If this resonated with you or made you reflect on your own situation, I'd appreciate you sharing it with others who might benefit from hearing it. Take care of yourself and remember that whatever choice you make about your own life, make it for the right reasons. Make it because it's what you truly want, not because it's what others expect. Be well.